Hi, welcome to my presentation for Info 281, and thank you for joining me. My name is Abels-Sullivan, and today I will be talking to you about some of the indigenous tribes of Eastern California, including the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. To provide some further context about my research, I would like to discuss the Native communities and institutions that I am going to be discussing. The Morongo Band of Mission Indians is made up of multiple smaller tribes. Some of these tribes have separate official distinctions, so my research, while initially focused on the Morongo Band of Mission Indians, will also touch on the Rincon Band of Luiseno Indians and the Cahuilla tribe. The document and institution I will be discussing pertains to each of these tribes respectively. While each tribe within the Morongo Band is distinct, they share many similar cultural practices, language groups, and territorial regions. To begin with, I will discuss my community profile. My community profile looks at the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. The band is made up of individuals from various tribal groups, including the Serrano, Cahuilla, Luiseno, and Chemehuevi. The Morongo Reservation consists of 35,000 square acres located at the base of the San Jacinto and San Giorgino Mountains in Riverside County, California. The tribe was first established in 1865, though it has a much longer history throughout California that is unfortunately not covered by the scope of my research. It became federally recognized when the reservation was created by President Grant in the 1870s. The Morongo Band now operates a large resort and casino, the money from which it uses to support other Native communities without the ability to establish casinos on their land. The Serrano, Cahuilla, and Luiseno languages are classified as Uto-Aztecan, and they are the most common native languages within the reservation. Many Uto-Aztecan languages are considered to be critically endangered. There are various cultural practices shared by the tribes, including bird dancing, basket weaving, pottery, agave harvesting, as well as acorn processing. Moving on to my document analysis, the document I chose to analyze is titled The Rincon Band of Luiseno Indians Cultural Resources Ordinance, Rincon Tribal Code 10.100. It is an official piece of tribal legislation for the Rincon Band of Luiseno Indians. The document details the governing of the extraction of and interaction with cultural resources. The document was written and passed by tribal government and codifies explicit protections and procedures for when developers or individuals encounter cultural artifacts relevant to the tribe. The Rincon Cultural Resources Protection Ordinance was issued and adopted in 2015. The document outlines the expected protocols for dealing with culturally relevant artifacts related to the Rincon Band of Luiseno Mission Indians. The band is a federally recognized tribe, which is important to consider when discussing this document. There are several key takeaways from the document. The legislation establishes an official council which is tasked with decision-making and policy regarding cultural and historical artifacts. According to the policy, a cultural resource permit is required before any land disturbances occur within the reservation. It also formally defines what constitutes unlawful action in regard to cultural artifacts. Furthermore, this could best be comprehended as a component of a larger set of documents. It is dependent on U.S. legal code regarding indigenous recognition and sovereignty While most of the ordinance is focused on tribal affairs and enforced by tribal courts, as a document, it exists within the context of U.S. settler colonialism. The existence and validity of this document is connected to the validity and of the tribe as a federally recognized entity. This recognition gives the tribe rights and authority within the borders of the U.S. that non-recognized tribes would not necessarily have received. The provisions outlined in this document can be connected back to two other documents, NAGPRA and UNDRIP. The UNDRIP, or the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, is not binding legislation, but instead is a motion adopted by the UN as an operating framework in order to attempt to establish an international standard for Indigenous rights. Whether individual countries choose to acknowledge it or incorporate it into their policy towards Indigenous people is entirely voluntary. NAGPRA, or the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, established official protection for the remains, objects, and cultural sites of Indigenous peoples in the U.S. It was adopted in 1990 and provides support and protection from the federal government for issues such as the ones outlined in the Louisiana Ordinance. Amherst Policy and American Philosophical Association I will discuss later on in this presentation. This ordinance is at its heart meant to preserve the cultural resources of the Rincon Band of Luiseno Indians. This goal of cultural preservation is also a core value of librarianship. This idea of preservation has, like museums, often been employed as a tool of the colonial power structure. As the profession grows and changes, however, we can see where LIS values such as preservation of cultural heritage can work for the benefit of Native American tribes. Moving forward is my institutional profile. I conducted my profile on the Maukey Museum, which is located on the Morongo Reservation in Banning, California. Founded by Cohia community members and academics Dr. Catherine Siva Saubal and Jane Penn in 1965. Saubal and Penn utilized their respective family collections of cultural artifacts to start the museum as the culmination of a decades-long goal of several Cohia community members. It is also notable that it is the first museum in California founded and operated by natives. According to their mission statement, they are committed to preserving the cultural traditions and history of the Cahuilla Indians and other Southern California Indian tribes. The museum hosts several programs. Events include their annual Agave Harvest and Roast Festival, the Kewet Festival, bird dance gathering, flint knapping, fall gathering, as well as a variety of lectures. Their Agave Harvest and Roast is a two-part event in which participants learn about the collection and cooking of traditional Cahuilla staple foods. The event teaches about the culinary history of the Cahuilla and allows participants to try a variety of native foods. The Kewet is an annual festival featuring a variety of traditional crafts, foods, and practices. Cahuilla bird singing and dancing is a traditional practice shared by many tribes within the Morongo Reservation that recounts the cosmology through traditional songs and dances. The Maukey Museum collection aims to support learning and promote the sharing of Cahuilla culture in multiple ways. This includes the inclusion of handmade objects, native plants, cultural events, collected books on Cahuilla culture, as well as a publishing imprint for academic materials. The museum collection has traditional handmade pottery, baskets, and tools, and these items help to teach visitors about daily life for Cahuilla people prior to and following colonization. This connection to the past helps to draw a through line to the present and contextualizes the information found within history books by tying it to living people. The Temalpak Native Plant Garden provides teaching opportunities to share about native food systems and traditional medicine. Their agave roast allows participants to follow the process of significant cultural food events, and the library, operated by the museum, collects nearly 400 books on Cahuilla Native history, indigenous history in California, as well as the natural history and wildlife and regional history of California in general. This collection is important as it reaffirms the continued presence of indigenous people in California by maintaining a collection that demonstrates the contemporary continuation of traditional indigenous practices through crafts such as pottery, basket making, as well as making traditional medicine and foodways through a native garden and special cultural events. The Malki Museum helps to reinforce the presence of the Cahuilla in California. Additionally, through their public collection and through their publication of scholarly works, the Malki Museum maintains a historical record for the Cahuilla and supports the creation of new knowledge studying the history and culture of indigenous peoples in California. There are several connections to make to the collections to the larger literature and issues within LIS. Libraries have had a fraught relationship with indigenous groups. When first established in the US, libraries served as institutional support for the colonial enterprise of the new state. They served as repositories for stolen indigenous objects, remains, and cultural productions. Over time, however, indigenous people have transformed the relationship between libraries and tribes through the establishment of tribal libraries, indigenous-centered categorization systems, as well as through the establishment of new policy that operates based on cultural humility in order to create more respectful and culturally competent collections of indigenous artifacts. The Brian Deerwood classification system, for example, was designed to counter the ingrained colonial ideas within the Dewey Decimal and Library of Congress systems. It approaches information organization through an indigenous perspective and worldview. Furthermore, Amherst College and the American Psychological Association serve as examples of colonial institutions that have defined and adopted groundbreaking policy that defers to Native people in determining what to do with different objects in their collections. These institutions defer to the decision-making of tribal institutions to determine whether objects in the collection are appropriate to display. Finally, online platforms like Mukurtu provide a means for indigenous institutions to establish their own collections and databases. Featured here are several photos taken during a visit to the Malki Museum. Here we have examples of traditional tools and baskets, as well as other types of vessels and sandals made by Cahuilla people. Here we have examples in the museum of native plants used both medicinally as well as for food. The museum maintains a collection of both dried preserved examples within the museum as well as an actual garden within the museum itself. Pictured in the bottom row are photos of native plants grown in the Tamalpak Native Plant Garden, as well as a covered pit used for roasting agave, as well as the roasted agave plant itself. In conclusion, libraries have come a long way from their establishment as colonial support systems. We are at a point in history where libraries are instead serving vital supportive roles in the preservation, promotion, and connection of Native communities across the country. Thank you very much for your time. I encourage you to explore the Malki Museum as well as the other resources in this presentation. Attached also is my reference page if